Good morning and welcome all to the Audit Committee. First of all, I think we have a full house. Are there any apologies?
There's no apologies.
No, full house. Thank you very much. Is there any business for consideration in the meeting? I don't think so. It hasn't been submitted. Declarations of interest. Going, gone. Could we look at the minutes of the meeting of 3rd February? I should say, I think, a welcome to Paul Dorset. We know your name is spelt otherwise. This will be rectified. Are we happy that these are correct minutes? Are there matters arising? That concludes the minutes. Could I ask Internal Audit to speak to the paper on the National Fraud Initiative?
The National Fraud Initiative is a national computer-based exercise where data held by various organisations is compared in order to identify fraud or error. Matches that would not normally be expected to occur are reported for further investigation. Reportable matches would include an individual recorded as an employee and the same individual shown as receiving benefit, or an individual recorded as being deceased but also holding a blue disabled parking badge. Internal Audit is taking over responsibility for the administration of the NFI exercise on a phased basis from the Operations Support Manager during 2015. The Council uploaded the data for the 2014-15 exercise in October 2014, and the resulting matches were made available to us in January 2015. This report provides an update on the number of matches arising from the 14-15 exercise and progress with reviewing the matches identified. There have been 3,285 matches and 911 have been reviewed with no issues identified. 24 were closed after investigation and 2,350 are still being checked and investigated. The Audit Committee is asked to note the content of the report and that further updates on the matching process will be provided in May and September.
Are there questions on the initiative? Councillor Devine.
Yeah, I find it very difficult to get my head around the matches and the number of matches, and then the corrections. Could we? What triggers off a match?
A number of organisations upload data to the Audit Scotland, and this data is compared, and if there is anything that looks as if it may be a duplication, it may be an error, or it may possibly indicate fraud, this is reported as a match. It's all done on a computerised basis, so matches are simply thrown up where the same names or the same addresses are shown where you wouldn't expect them to be seen.
That's very helpful, but could we get a feel if you have, say, for example, housing benefit 849 matches, how much is that as a percentage of the total housing benefits?
I can't give you a financial total at the moment, but it's a low percentage. It's not a high percentage of the total.
Councillor Muirhead.
We have in the past had some explanation about how the matches are, roughly how the matches are set up in housing benefit, payroll, blue badges, as you sort of explained. But there's two seem to have come on this year, personal budgets and creditors. Is it possible, you might not be able to do it here now, but maybe to get just an explanation of along the lines of what Peter was saying, what the matches are, what the examples of how that's matched. And also with the creditors one, why it's coming up now and wasn't there before? Why we've not looked at that particular area before?
This is the first year that we have uploaded our creditor information. So this is the first year that the creditors have been looked at in this way by the Audit Scotland. For personal budgets, this is a new initiative, and it is similar to housing benefit and even residential care homes. If we have clients who are in receipt of direct payments, personal budgets, we're checking to ensure that all of their income has been declared and also that they are still alive.
Grant Thornton could comment on this, but we've always tested creditors on a sampling basis as part of the audit. This will be a much more robust methodology using a total constituency and an electronic match.
And I take it, when you said that this is the first time that creditors have been uploaded, is that because it's the first time that they've agreed to run that, you know, that's been set up, or is that something that we have not done in the past, when we could have?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question because this is the first that I've looked at it. But as I understand it, this is the first year that we've uploaded it. I can't say whether we were asked in the past. I don't know that.
Just that it would have seemed an obvious thing to, if there was possibility of getting data matches for fraud in that area, it would have been one that, you know, I would have thought we would have used. That's the point I'm trying to make.
As I understand it, within this, a lot of the data work is going to be taking place centrally on a pan-Scotland basis, and we will be feeding, as of October, our data to a central unit that will then give us the results back. Should that result in a greatly different performance from the old way that we did it?
No, I don't think so. Basically, we just feed the information back, as far as we understand it, to Audit Scotland, and they produce a national report. It's basically up to each individual unit to look at these matches, and they basically feed back to internal audit, and we compile the statistics.
So presumably next year is the first time we'll see a meaningful trend comparing one year with the next.
For creditors, yes.
Chair, I was just going to say on the creditors match, my experience of this is that it would always throw out, when it's looked at, a large number of matches, and then when it's investigated, that drops quite dramatically because there are loads of reasons why it would match. So the duplicate payments and all sorts of things, but actually I'd expect this number to come down quite significantly once the matching, based on previous experience of this, once it's actually been processed.
If, when we distill right down, we do find a number of worrying items, will that be brought specially to this committee?
Yes, I think there's always a final report that comes to the audit committee of the results of the data matches.
Okay, so we'll hear more of this in the months to come. Thank you very much. Can we turn now to the external audit plan, and I could ask Grant Thornton to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just kick off with some introductory words, and then Grace will take us through the main risks. I mean, the two things I wanted to pick up on were, if we turn to page 7, and this is something that's relatively new, not as a concept, but in the way that it's explained to Audit Committee in terms of materiality and the concept of auditors' materiality. Obviously, as councillors will be aware, auditors obviously can't be expected to check every single transaction. I mean, if they did, they'll be here for a very long time. So we approach the audit of financial statements with the concept of materiality, which helps to stratify sample sizes, where we look at areas such as creditors or payroll. but was also used as a concept to judge whether an error identified as a result of the audit is material or not. Where an error is material, we would always be asking officers to change the accounts to reflect that, but where it's an error is below our materiality level, then there's an opportunity for the council to say, well, actually, we recognise your point, but we don't want to adjust the accounts because it's below materiality. That having been exercised, that judgment, then we would not qualify the opinion. If we had a material error that was unmoved, then that would be a qualification issue, albeit they are very rare in public sector. And in that concept of materiality, because it impacts on our sample sizes, we have the concept of planning materiality, which effectively takes the overall materiality figure and brings it down a notch, just so that we cover the potential for error in and around the materiality figure. So that's set out on page 7. So that gives you a context on how we conduct the audit and the sort of scale of things that we're looking at.
Tell me which is page 7, because
21 in the agenda.
Or 20.
yeah, why don't you use those figures? Because that's what we are using.
Right, okay. Page 21 then. And then the only other thing I wanted to pick up on was the back of the reports, the audit fees, which is page 33. Is it 33? 33.
Yeah,
32, sorry. 32 and 33. And just to note, our fee has increased by 1% this year. This is in line with the sort of ranges that Audit Scotland have indicated. Clearly, we will be looking at this each year to see whether there's an opportunity to reduce the fee with a more efficient audit process, and we'll be working with management on that, but that just to flag to councillors that that's a proposed fee for this year. I'll now pass over to Grace, who will talk about the key audit risks.
Thank you. As you're aware, that as public sector auditors, we have wider responsibilities than simply the financial statements. So within page 20 and 19 and 20, we try to set out some of those kind of wider risks that affect the council. So hopefully a lot of these are risks that you'll recognise. So the first one we talk around is about the programme of investment. So really the quite ambitious programme of investment at Midlothian, and really that reflects quite a lot of echoing. This is on page 19, sorry. So the significance of capital expenditure, and also recognising that in these investments then you work in partnership with others. So we're interested really in the partnership side of that too. We talk about leadership and revised leadership arrangements, partly as a result of the health and social care integration, but also during a period of financial constraint and recognising the level of savings that are required, then obviously governance and scrutiny arrangements are critical. So as part of our responsibilities, we'll really look at the effectiveness of governance responsibilities and the reporting on that, and we'll report on that as part of our annual audit report. As you'd expect, we'll continue to monitor the progress of the Council's financial strategy, and linked to that is number 4, the transformation programme, really to ensure that the savings that planned are being delivered, or that there is a plan B in place and that those are reported appropriately. On the following pages is page 20, then we talk about quite a few of the developments in the sector. So the first one is on financial reporting. So the accounts are prepared in line with the CITFA Code of Practice on local government accounting. It has to be said the main changes in the code this year relate to group accounts, which Midlothian don't have. So actually it's quite a straightforward year in terms of the accounts. Bearing in mind the number 2, which is about the local authority regulations, which set up how the accounts are reported. And within that, there's a change to the management commentary, which is really the kind of front end of the accounts. And so it's a bit of a strange bullet point there to say that they have to have a management commentary in line with the Central Government Financial Reporting Manual. That reflects that there aren't actually updated guidelines yet for Scottish councils that reflect local government. But on Thursday, we're holding a training session with Midlothian and with our other councils to talk about the changes and what we expect to see at the front end. So we're hoping that will be quite straightforward. We also talk about health and social care integration, as you would imagine, and we'll look at the progress towards integration, looking at the governance, the proposed governance arrangements, and critically, I guess, the financial plans associated with that. And finally, we talk about some of the other returns that we're asked to do. So these are the grant audits that we submit to Audit Scotland every year as well. If I turn to the actual financial statements risks, so I'm looking at page 25 here. Under auditing standards, there are two significant risks associated with every single organisation. And so I guess I would highlight here that one of the significant risks that is assumed by auditing standards relates to improper recognition of revenue. We've actually rebutted that risk at Midlothian Council because of the nature of funding. So the vast majority of funding for the council comes from Scottish Government or from grants. And so there's actually very limited scope to manipulate that. So it's not like sales, for example. So within our approach, then we have rebutted that risk, but I guess that it would be good just to confirm that the Audit Committee agrees with that view. The other significant risk is around about management override of controls. So within that, we complete a lot of detailed testing on areas that are affected by judgments, so areas like provisions, bad debt provision, depreciation, things like that. And we test a lot of journals because journals tend to be an area that management can affect the financial statements. On page 26, we talk about the reasonably possible risks. So these are the areas of the financial statements that we spend most of our attention on. And as you would expect, there tend to be areas of high spend and where there are a lot of management controls. So looking at the expenditure, payroll costs, benefit expenditure, and the housing revenue account. I think the governance and performance we've essentially talked about in terms of the kind of broader risks facing the council. I guess I would just highlight within that for governance arrangements, and we'll have a look at the risk management arrangements because they did kind of change over the last 12 to 18 months. So we'll specifically look at that within our annual report as well. And linked to another report later on in the agenda, we have to complete a return on the statutory performance indicators, so that will look at the Council's public performance reporting arrangements as well. Happy to take any questions.
On two occasions in the past, because of changes in accounting standards, mainly fair value accounting, we've had major adjustments to our balance sheet. Are we to expect anything in the most recent accounting rules that might incline a similar experience?
To respond to that, the Council have actually rejigged, I suppose you would call it, the revaluation programme. So actually during the year, so as at the 31st of March, they're asking the in-house valuers to complete a new revaluation of all the housing stock. So we're expecting probably some changes, but not mistakes, so or not errors. So we're working with the finance team at the moment, really just to kind of set out what that programme should look like and how we report on that. So we're not anticipating errors from that this year.
As I recall, our previous policy was not to do a granular revaluation of assets because of the cost of that, but of course over time the argument for biting the bullet becomes stronger.
All that we've asked for really is that programme to be set out, so the programme of how they do revaluations, and to make sure that each category of asset is revalued at the same time, so that there's not some assets valued at historic cost and some revalued or at fair value, so it's sorting that out. So I think that my view just now is that we're much more confident about that process.
Okay, so we'll have a removal of anomalies within the asset base, but we're not to expect a major shift in the captions.
That's right.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask a couple of questions on New Buyers Crescent on page 30 in the appendix. paragraph 2, the Council has asked the Scottish Government to call a public inquiry. I just wonder what form that will take. Will it be in Holyrood or will it be in Midlothian? And the final paragraph, Grant Thornton is as part of the audit. They reviewed the Council's progress to identify the causes and lessons learned. Are they happy that we are in a comfortable place vis-à-vis insurance, etc., etc.? If you could let me have a comment on that.
Perhaps John Blair would like to talk to this.
Thanks, Chair. The first update I would like to give Audit Committee is we understand the Accounts Commission do not intend undertaking a Section 102 report. So on that basis, the Council has engaged external advisors, solicitors and engineers. We're progressing with an investigation to identify where blame lies, and it was in our intention to report to Council in spring.
So we're ongoing, but using our own devices and approach to the problems. Councillor De Vink.
So, are we confident that if we are not getting compensation, that we can get it from the people that gave us this advice? Is their insurance policy sufficient to get us to £12 million?
John.
Yeah, we've already received a number of reports to Council. I'm not going to speculate on the outcome of legal action. It would be inappropriate to do so at this stage. What I will do is I'll give an assurance to Council and to Audit Committee, as we've done throughout the whole of the New Buyers Crescent, Gore Avenue situation. We will come forward to Council as information emerges. That will include views on the likelihood of legal action succeeding.
But it would be so helpful if we could just ask all those people, the worthy consultants, that should their advice be wrong, we would have no other option than to go against their insurance policy.
Yeah, the position outlined by John is very much in line with the deliberations of this committee when we previously discussed new buyers, and clearly a lot of the matters are legal and sensitive. I'd suggest if you want further details, you have an offline discussion on it, but I'm satisfied that the Council is proceeding along with the previous resolutions of this committee. Any further comments from Grant Thornton? So we look forward to another year's audit. Thank you again for your help.
Sorry, could we go through Appendix A?
Which page, Councillor De Vink?
I really want to go to all the ones that are basically yellow, so we start at number 36, and then we go to the subsequent, there's one more page, 38, that has yellow. So could we just identify the yellow issues? Because there's a medium risk, everything else is low risk, and it looks all very honky-dory, but the medium risk is one that I'm concerned about, and I would quite like some explanation on those 4 issues.
Grace, do you want to give a high-level lead on this?
Explain that. All the ones that are yellow are those that we've assessed as reasonably possible, so those are the areas that we think there are risks associated with the financial statements. So those are the ones that we talk about on page 26 and 27 as the reasonably possible risks. So those are the areas of kind of high spend and high controls. So if you look at in the pack on page 26 and 27, then we give a detail of what we think that risk is and the work we're going to do to give ourselves assurance over that risk.
You're stating that the net cost of services has a reasonable possibility that there is the risk as described at 258 million was a high volume of transactions being processed.
Yep.
Where is the risk? You know, just explain to me where the risk is and where we should be looking.
Well, so that's our operating expenses risk. So it reflects that there are it's a high volume of expenditure and occurring in lots of different places in the council. So there's lots of transactions and lots of controls over those transactions. So if we can conduct work on those key controls, then that's how we start to give ourselves assurance on all those levels of transaction. And then we, those are one of the areas that we can conduct much more work on, much more detailed work on, because of that level and breadth of transactions. So on page 26, then we kind of outline that we'll do quite a lot of sample testing on both the key controls and on those individual transactions.
So a lot of conformity to contract tests will be implicit in that?
Things like that, yeah.
Can I start again? As Grant Thornton does other local authorities, how do we compare with the other local authorities that you do the same work in?
In terms of the risks?
In terms of medium risk?
Broadly, most councils are very similar. So most councils will have the same kind of risks because they're doing the same kind of things. So they're spending money on the same kind of areas. So social care, education will be the big areas to spend. And they all tend to have around about 40–50% of costs are employee costs. So they are broadly similar. I guess the one thing that's slightly different is on housing, because Midlothian has obviously the housing revenue account, some councils don't, and the governance risks and performance risks tend to be different at each individual council, but those areas of financial statements tend to be the same.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking on that page 38, in the middle, you've got borrowing, brackets long and short term. One thing that's come through with our financial reports that come to council is that we have a significant amount of borrowing on short term, which is being handled very well to the extent that we're getting extraordinarily good low interest rates, better than other councils. Do you look at the risks involved in that the markets could suddenly change and the impact of that on the council's finances?
So broadly, that's a matter for management. So and that's why management give assurance to the council on the treasury management function. I don't know if Gary wants to say anything on that. One thing which is different this year is Audit Scotland have actually just done a review of treasury management and actually visited Midlothian as part of that process. So they're going to be reporting on that on Thursday, actually, so imminently coming out. Now, what usually happens with that is that they provide a kind of checklist, or they provide a broad, this is what's happening in the sector, and then we look at it. So we look at how Midlothian performs against what they say. Gary, I don't know if you want to say anything on treasury management.
Not really much to add, and you highlight a risk in terms of the pitching our borrowing at the right position. You would crucify me, I suppose, if I came along and said I wanted to completely de-risk and pay 4% for a 20-year loan when I could borrow it on a daily basis at 0.5%. So it's where your risk appetite is and how you reflect that through your deliberations on the treasury management strategy.
For the history book, we've never been involved with BCCI or an Icelandic bank or the Cooperative Bank, as far as I'm aware, and the positions you take are always advised independently. One question, we did look a lot last year at aged debtors for this council, but you haven't chosen that as a particular yellow area that you ought to look at. Does that imply that progress is being made?
It's probably part of the areas that we'll follow up anyway as part of our normal work. And actually we've done quite a lot of background work in terms of transactions listing to make sure that we're sorted for the final statements audit, to make sure that we can test that in more detail. But in terms of a broad risk to in terms of materiality, then it's not one of our areas with it as a reasonably possible risk, but it is an area that they'll follow up.
Thank you very much. We move now from external audit to internal audit, and we have a programme for next year. Graham?
This report presents the draft internal audit plan for 15-16 for comment and review. The plan has been prepared following the methodology in the audit charter and follows the requirements established in the public sector internal audit standards. These include the need to undertake an assessment of the organisation's risk management framework and relative risk maturity, consideration of local and national issues, an assessment of the organisation's overall assurance framework, and a documented annual risk assessment supporting the requirement to produce an overall audit opinion. We have met with all heads of service, the corporate management team, the chair of the audit committee, and passed our plan to Grant Thornton for comment. The audit committee is therefore asked to review and agree the proposed plan, and to note that 2 audits have been put in the plan for health and social care, but these may change following input from the new integration board and NHS internal audit. Thank you very much.
As we discussed last year, there is some capacity during the year if issues arise for you to do special consultancy work.
Yes, we basically have 4 assignments put aside for consultancy work, and we also have the same number for any investigations that may require to be undertaken.
I've seen this some days ago. Are we all content with the scope? Thank you again for such a comprehensive review of what we might be getting up to next year. Pages 49, the audit committee meetings. There's a proposal to reduce the number of audit committee meetings. How do we feel about that? Perhaps some background before we have a discussion.
Thank you, Chair. As this report sets out, a benchmarking exercise was undertaken with other Scottish councils to determine frequency of audit committee meetings held elsewhere. The majority of those meet in a quarterly cycle with either 1 or 2 meetings reserved for discussion of draft and final accounts. Paragraph 2.1 sets out a number of potential advantages in terms of releasing officer time, coordination with the risk reporting cycle. If the committee were minded to go ahead with this, it would need to be approved by full council.
If we do go ahead and reduce, it is on the basis, as indeed at present, if there were exceptional requirements for an additional meeting, we could continue to have that, so that every subject is given full justice and proper time. There's also, I think, some requirement to look at the precise dates going forward so that they integrate with the Audit Scotland requirement for us to coordinate external audits.
I think it's a very welcome issue. It frees up the staff to a great extent, and I welcome it greatly.
Yes, I think the main driver is that there's a lot of preparation for these meetings, and we will in fact become more effective as a group if we change the balance towards more time actually carrying out the plans that we have, as distinct from meeting and talking about the issues. Take that as an approval to progress as suggested. Item 9, page 57. We're reviewing the statutory performance indicators. This is not so that we look at each caption and discuss the content. The councillors will already know these subject areas. The question is whether or not we are calculating the performance indicators in a consistent manner with other councils and also consistent with our own data and records. Can I ask James to talk to this?
Yes, this audit reviewed 5 statutory performance indicators to determine the adequacy of processes and controls to allow accurate reporting. And SPIs reviewed were older persons over 65 home care costs per hour, self-directed support spend on adults over 18 as a percentage of social work spend, the total cost per attendance at sport facilities, net cost of refuse collection, and costs of maintenance per kilometre of roads. Our audit identified that there's general compliance with the SPI definitions and guidance and systems and procedures in place to produce SPI measures, and that the LGF local government benchmark framework indicators are annually submitted to performance review and scrutiny committee for review by elected members and management. And but some issues identified were in relation to the accuracy of the calculation for home care hours, the centres used in the usage calculation for sport and leisure attendance, some updates to the templates used in the preparation of local financial returns, and other improvements in relation to audit trails and working papers. As some weaknesses have been identified in the controls and improvements are possible, we have on this occasion rated the review as average as per the definitions on page 12 of this report. We have raised a small number of recommendations which are detailed in the Management Action Plan to reduce the risk further, and these recommendations have been accepted by management. The Audit Committee is invited to review the contents of the audit report and endorse the agreed audit recommendations. There's one error that we'd like to point out in this report on page 60 in the table. One error in the report on page 60. This is in relation to the rankings for self-directed support. For 2012-13, the ranking should be 13, and for 2013-14, the ranking should be 11, and we apologise for that error.
Okay, I think the issue here is whether the SBIs are going to be robust enough for us to make management-type decisions based on the comparative situation we have with other Scottish councils. And clearly in the past, for example, our calculation of adult and social care has been very unusual compared to other councils. When do you think we will get to the end of this process when we can be reasonably confident these are apples and not apples and oranges?
I think over time in relation to the working groups with the improvement service, this position should improve because the use of the local financial return data for this purpose is a relatively recent change. And there are always going to be some differences in the way some councils are structured and the use of LFR data. But over time, I think, in relation to the next year and review of the data, there will be more progress in that.
Okay, and also Grant Thornton are looking at this area as part of the external audit.
As part of our work on SBIs, we'll look at the overall arrangements for the collection, particularly for public performance reporting, so where you're publishing performance results, to make sure that the Council's own verification procedures are robust and strong enough. And so, if necessary, then we'll test some of the data quality for PIs that are reported in future as well.
Councillor De Vink.
I am so disappointed that the rankings of Midlothian are all out of 32, I take it. This is 32. You know, to find ourselves 27, 20, 27, 15 is really, to put it mildly, shameful. And I wonder what it is that we can do to make those rankings more like 3, 4, 5, and 6.
You appear to have focused on areas where Midlothian is, for all sorts of reasons, in the bottom quartile. Do you want to comment on the selection of these topics?
The audit more focused on the data Midlothian has and whether we're producing it accurately rather than a comparative of what other councils are doing and what we're doing. So that wasn't really in the scope of this review.
Kenneth.
Recently we reported both to the Cabinet and to the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee on overall Midlothian performance in relation to the benchmarks. I think at both these meetings I expressed my view that I'd like us to be doing better in a number of areas, but it's perhaps worth reminding councillors we had more indicators in the top quartile than we do in the bottom, and we have more indicators in the top half than we do in the bottom half. So our performance is overall slightly better than average. It's not as good as I want or expect it to be. And I think these are some examples where our ranking is relatively low down. I think the other issue for me, and we spoke about this both at PRS and at Cabinet, is that we need to focus on the measures which are important to us. So, for example, we spoke about positive destinations, which are important to us and where we put in a significant effort to improve performance. Some of these issues here, round about costs, etc., costs may be high because we've made a decision to spend money in a particular area because it's a priority for the Council. So I think in terms of looking at the indicators, we need to take that kind of overall view that some of the things, particularly cost indicators, may be high because we've chosen to invest.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I think that was largely the point I wanted to pick up. There's 2 points of this. That the audit here is looking at the consistency of the recording of the information to make sure that the indicators are comparable across authorities, and you need to know that when you're looking at the indicator that every authority is actually measuring exactly the same things, then you can have that read across. But a lot of these are about amount spent, and they don't look at the, I mean, if you look at the actual rankings, it doesn't look at the other side of that and where we rank on the performance outcome because of that spend. So in a number of cases we do spend more, but that's because we actually get a better service out at the other end, and I'm slightly more comfortable with that than spending less to get a substandard service coming out the other side of it. But to me this audit was much more about the consistency of the information going into the system.
Councillor Muirhead.
I can understand that. I can also understand, to some extent, the point that Councillor De Vink makes. You know, if we had everything in the second top quartile, if you like, above the middle, and everything was there, that would be a good position to be in. Obviously, we want to maximise our performance overall and be in the top quartile if possible. But where there are concerns, it's all very well to say on the whole we're average, but where there are things that are way down the bottom and they're not as a result of a deliberate policy. You know, as you say, we may take it on the chin and be at 32 in terms of what we spend on care for our elderly. That may be a choice we make. But where that isn't the case, then obviously we want to improve that. I think that pretty much goes without saying. The issue, though, on page 60 that you just touched on, the adult older person's care and the costs per hour, it indicates in the narrative further on page 63 that it was the differences or discrepancies there which took it from £12.46 an hour to £23.81 an hour was as a result of the way that the data was being extrapolated for Framework I, or sorry, taken from Framework I for the first month of the year and extrapolated right across the year. Is that the reason for such a huge jump, or how much has that got to do with the issues that we've got in terms of the overspends at the likes of New Buyers and the other care home that's affected? Is that possible to answer that?
These figures relate to the cost of home care, which is care delivered in individuals' own homes. The way the data is extrapolated does have a significant impact, and in particular the 12-13 figure is a way below what any of us would expect in terms of our commissioned care, which is the cheaper care, and it's above that. So that figure isn't an accurate reflection of cost in 12-13. The 21-13 again is subject to the same variation because of the way it's extrapolated. However, there are other factors that will impact. Midlothian's in-house services, predominantly reablement. We invest heavily in that. It's an outcome-focused service, and it works using a rehab model, the consequence of that investment is that we achieve a significant reduction in the number of hours. So although we have a heavy investment in terms of those first 6 weeks that an individual receives care, that then the cost per hour for those 6 weeks will be high, but it will reduce, and it will be then we'll have smaller packages as a consequence of that. And in recent comparisons with the City of Edinburgh, our care packages were significantly lower than what was being allocated there, and indeed across the other 3 councils where they've got much less effective reablement services. So that's as an example of one of the factors that will be impacting on that, and that this particular statistic here won't reflect that.
Marco, I accept that, and I should have noticed that, so it was home care, care at home. But I mean, this isn't about anyway justifying how much we spend on that. It's about the accuracy of the figures. And for how long prior to 12-13 in this performance indicator were we reporting half, or roughly half, of the national average? You know, I guess I'm saying, how come we didn't notice this? Was that the first time? I can't recall if we had that exact indicator in previous years, and if it was always half the national average. Should that not have rung alarm bells, kind of thing, in terms of the accuracy of the way we were doing it?
I think we had noticed it was an unusual ratio, but we knew the service was performing well in physical terms.
Yes, 12-13 was. I'm not sure if this indicator was used before that, but 12-13 was the point that certainly we noticed that it was considerably out of kilter with the rest. But I would also add that in relation to this particular indicator, there's been huge swings across the country, and in 12-13 there was huge variations, and there were other authorities that were reporting costs of care that just wouldn't have stacked up. So it's one that's been very problematic across the country, and also my understanding is that these indicators for health and social care are going to be subject to further scrutiny, and there's some concerns about how adequately they describe services performance, because for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier.
So this need for a robust basis on which to compare KPIs is an ongoing affair, so that once we have the numbers we can do gap analysis and therefore work out whether our position is a deliberate one or we're missing some efficiency that we could possibly achieve. Since no one's... Ian.
So yes, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, the problem I have with this in general is it's described as performance indicators, whereas I would describe performance as being a combination of both cost and quality, and we're not seeing any measure of quality here. Take, for example, the cost of maintenance per kilometre of our roads. We could spend a lot to get a kilometre of the road resurfaced and do it well. It's going to last an awful long time. Could spend the same amount of money doing it 2 or 3 times and get poorer quality for the same amount of money. The other issue I have is that there's a tendency, not just here, but I would imagine in all councils, to look at where you're near the bottom of the table and try and find out if your figures are accurate. And hopefully they're not, and they'll be readjusted so you move up the table. What about where we're in the middle of the table? Do we ever look at those closely, or are we quite happy, thank you very much? And the same with all the other councils. How accurate are their figures? Are they doing the same exercise as we're doing here? And are they maybe not so open about questioning it? You know, again, it goes back to comparing apples with apples. You know, what are we comparing against? What are we comparing?
You mentioned roads, which I thought nobody was going to raise, but it's been raised. Kenneth.
Yes, thank you. I mean, again, I'd refer members back to the reports that came to Cabinet and scrutiny. What we have here is a very small sample out of the over 50 indicators which were reported. So my recollection, I don't have it in front of me, my recollection in terms of roads, because there are measures which relate to the quality of roads, is that we are in the second quartile on them. I don't know if John can confirm that or otherwise. I think the broader point about the accuracy and usefulness of the the benchmarking framework is an important one, and there are still concerns, particularly in relation to the cost indicators. When I spoke at both Cabinet and PRS, I kind of on an anecdotal basis split the indicators into those that measure service performance, which are actually the easiest to deal with, those that measure cost, where I think we have concerns about the LFR returns and whether these are good comparisons across the councils, and those that relate to customer satisfaction, which are done by National Household Survey. I mean, from my point of view, I have to say that I do look at the ones in the bottom quartile, and positive destinations was in the bottom quartile. That wasn't good enough. We had to shift it. And this year, for example, we see that council tax collection is in the bottom quartile. I don't think that's good enough, and certainly I've said to the relevant head of service that one of his tasks is to ensure we begin to move up. And as members are very well aware, for educational attainment, we've still got a journey to make on that. Our performance isn't yet good enough. So we do look at all of them. We are concerned about some of the comparisons, and there's a series of benchmarking groups which are brought together by the Improvement Service, where the different councils come together to talk about specific benchmark indicators. And it's clear that people are measuring things in different ways. And until that is sorted out, and these benchmarks I think are now in their third or fourth year, until that's sorted out, then these aren't as accurate comparisons as we would wish them to be. And given the kind of focus, for example, that the Scottish Parliament's Local Government Regeneration Committee is putting on these, we need to ensure that is accurate, or else the danger is the conclusions are being drawn on evidence which isn't sufficiently robust, particularly on the financial indicators.
Yes, on roads, my understanding is there is variability as to the treatment of capital and revenue payments across Scotland, so that number may also be dangerous to rely on until there's a standardisation across Scottish local authorities. Plus, as we know, there have been some exceptional road projects in Midlothian outside the normal, which may be another factor.
Sorry, but I still find that we are spending £11,281 per kilometre, and the Scottish average is 8,267. That's 30% difference. And okay, it might be that we have much fancier roads, but I still think when I drive over our roads that that's not the experience that I have got.
This paper is about the calculation of the numbers. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, that was the point, Chair. It was that there are any number of opportunities through Cabinet and Performance Review scrutiny to analyse in detail the performance of every aspect of the Council's functions in minute detail. This report's about, are we measuring them correctly? And it was really just backing that point up.
Well, I think we can but only conclude that we keep up our work here to make sure that these KPIs are a robust basis for analysing business decisions for the Council. Thank you, James. Finally, and I'd remind you we're in public on this, the internal audit report on controls over petty cash, page 77. Can I ask the Chief Executive to speak to this?
Thank you. Before I hand over to my colleagues in audit, I just wanted to say something briefly about this, because I think in the 5+ years I've been at the Council, we've seen a wide range of audit reports, some of which have shown us performing well in audit terms and some which have not. But I don't think we've had any where the level of assurance has been so low and the lack of a proper control framework has been so evident. And so I suppose I wanted to start off by emphasising from my perspective, it's simply not good enough. In the context of the challenges the Council faces, this is not a big issue to sort out. It's not a complex issue to sort out, but it needs to be sorted out. And that means proper procedures, proper recording, and effective monitoring and oversight, and also rationalisation, I think, of the number and scale of petty cash accounts that we have. Now, clearly, the introduction of the purchase-to-pay scheme is important in regard to this as well. Members will note the majority of recommendations are to be implemented by the 30th of April, and this is simply to assure members of the committee that as Chief Executive, I personally will be following up with the directors to ensure that these have been delivered. I think it's important we get this sorted out. And I'll hand over to...
Thank you. Basically, we looked at the strength of the control environment over petty cash and selected a sample of accounts from across the council to review. Although our testing did not find any fraudulent payments, we did identify a number of control failings, which included payments being made from the petty cash system, which should have been made through other systems, errors in the processing of VAT, spot checks were not being undertaken to check cash in hand balances reconciled to the balance in the float, the physical security of the cash was often poor, a lack of independent monitoring over expenditure incurred, and we found some expenditure that was not supported by receipts and others where there were missing vouchers. Although there are policies and procedures in place, we found that these needed to be more clearly defined and communicated to staff. We have therefore rated the strength of controls as poor. We have made 11 recommendations to improve internal controls operated over petty cash, and we understand that work is already underway to tackle some of these. The Audit Committee is therefore asked to note the attached report and endorse the Management Action Plan. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I think it's fairly clear that some of the flaws identified here are just not acceptable, so it's encouraging to hear the Chief Executive's comments about actions that are to be taken. I suppose the saving grace on this one is the amounts of money being talked about are not large sums, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the controls weren't there. So obviously we need to make sure these are in place as soon as possible.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, before I became a councillor, I was a freelance bookkeeper, and petty cash is notoriously difficult. But one thing I would say is that it's not the money, it's the message with this, that if the message gets across that you keep in tight control over the pennies, then it discourages anyone to go looking for the pounds. So I think it's important that we do get this tightened up. Can I just ask how often we find that the petty cash is reconciled? Is it monthly or just at the end of the financial year?
I think the procedures, Anne will correct me, but I think they're supposed to be done, is it every fortnight?
We currently have two procedures at the moment, so various areas. Some are doing it on a weekly basis, some are doing it on a fortnight basis, some areas are doing it on a monthly basis. But from my understanding, I believe that financial services, they reconcile the total petty cash, which is 59,000, on an annual basis, and they keep a record of all the petty cash impress holders. But we found that isn't maintained. So that's one of the recommendations we've addressed. So one of the recommendations we're addressing is for the council to have a one-wide council procedure, so there's no confusion and every area is reconciling on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, whatever the council agrees. But it varies at the moment.
Obviously, the systems here are very last century, and the movement to purchase cards should be an improvement. But as Councillor Milliken pointed out with our fuel cards, there's always a risk that if you have too many of them, although you will have an audit trail, there is also a possibility of lack of control. Presumably there will be carefully calculated spending limits on these cards and other internal controls so we can react quickly if anything goes wrong.
Basically, we have a plan. We have an audit on our plan next year to look at purchasing cards. But my understanding is that yes, you can put a limit on the card, and indeed, I think you can put a limit on the type of expenditure that you can actually purchase using that card. But we intend to follow up this report next year, and we're including that with a review of the new cards.
So the unitary control regime with proper monthly audits, proper docketing and no irregular expenditure, that will come in straight away, but the cards perhaps a little slower than that? Or are you bringing the cards in by 30th of April?
I think there's a pilot in April on the cards, and I think the plan is to roll those out by October.
And when will we next hear at this committee of the success of the new initiatives?
Basically, as I say, it's on our 15-16 plan, so the exact timings haven't been agreed yet, but we will keep the committee informed when we do that audit.
Councillor Bryant.
I'd just like to ask what happened on page 79, the third bullet point. We noted there have been thefts of petty cash from 2 areas in the past 2 years, and these were identified by management. Disciplinary investigations were undertaken. Does that mean that people were sacked, or what happened?
I'm not sure. I need to check whether I can comment on that in public.
Councillor Thompson.
I think, given the just Graham's comment there, I think perhaps it's the answers in the fact that that's being checked, and given that there are potential investigations there, it's maybe not one for public comment.
Agreed. Well, I'm glad we've got on top of this, and the damage is not worse than it has been. Thank you all very much. Councillor Levy.
I do apologise. I should have brought this up at an earlier stage, but I was reading last night when I went through the papers that we still haven't found a lay member for the audit committee, and it triggered off a thought that I have. So
this is matters arising from the minutes.
Sorry?
This is a matter arising from the minutes of the last meeting.
I apologise that I didn't raise it with the minutes, but we need to have a lay member, and I've got somebody in mind, and I would like to discuss his...
Perhaps you could discuss that offline with the Chief Executive?
Yeah, well, and with you.
It's simply to say that in terms of any member joining, the independent member joining the committee, there has to be a due process. And what I said at the last committee meeting is that we had advertised, we had some interest, we'd gone through an interview process, but because a couple of individuals had dropped out, we weren't able to appoint. And the intention was this year to go through that process again. So if there's any individuals that any member of the committee may have in mind as a suitable candidate, they would have to go through that process.
And it's a decision of the council.
Oh God, yes, indeed. Due process and good governance. I know, I understand that perfectly well, but I've got a very good candidate, and I would like to recommend him to you in due course.